Hi, it's Ken. We're at the KNS garage again. We got a C8 Z51 in here, track car. We're going to go through the brakes and do a refresh and show you what we've been working with lately on these cars that get to the track lot. Okay, so we have the car up in the air, and you can see that these brakes are being used quite hard. The calipers are not quite as bright yellow as they used to be. These Girodisc rotors, they've been on the car for a while. He's actually worn the slots all the way down. So these are definitely ready to replace. I can see the brake pads in there are down to all of 2 millimeters. So we'll get this apart and take a closer look at these parts on the bench as we rebuild the front rotors and install some new front brake pads. So now we're looking at the back brakes. Again, the calipers are definitely getting dark from the heat. That's pretty normal. And these rotors, these have been on the car a long time as well. And this is just time because a little hard to see. We'll show it better on the bench, but they're well heat checked. And those pads are a little better in the fronts, but pretty much done. So we'll get this all apart, review some of those things real quick, and then take a look at these parts and put some new 2-piece rotors on the rear of this car. Okay, so we've got the car apart now. Everything's off the car, and we'll just go over a couple of things. We've talked about it before, but we might as well review it quickly. So remember, it's a T40 for the brake pad pins, which I don't know why they put one on each side instead of just one pin through, but GM did. That's a T40. Be careful taking those out. And then the laser 10 spline socket for the caliper bolt. That's kind of a weird one too. Again, take your time getting those off. And the caliper bolts, I want to say this front was a 21. This is a steel bolt into an aluminum caliper. Ask all the STI guys how fun that can be at times. These fronts have been off a time or two, so the threads are good. No problem there. But in the rear, a little bit different story. We'll talk about that in a minute. The other thing is obviously track use. A lot of brake dust, of course. It bakes on. There's nothing you can really do about it. And the dust boots do melt and crumble and fall apart. And it's not really a big deal. We tend to maybe clean it a little bit here and there, but it's just part of what happens from track use. Other than that, we'll probably want to clean the hub here a little bit. He clearly drives in some rain which is perfectly fine. Just a little corrosion on the hub center. Everything else looks good. Again, these steel bolts here through the aluminum knuckle, sometimes that's a problem. We're not going to use anti-seize, and you can tell all these bolts have that pre-installed thread locker type stuff. Is what it is. The rotor hold down screw, again, that's funky to get in and out, but not actually required. So that's the front. We'll talk about the rotors and pads in a sec. Let's go to the back of the car. So the back of the car, it was never apart. So after a couple of years of tracking a lot, I don't want to move it too much, it's hanging, but the brake line's wonky back here too. These bolts were really tight, and so we kind of had to work them loose. And we cracked them half a turn or so and got a little bit of ATF down in there between the bolt and the knuckle and the caliper because they were starting to seize. The steel bolt into aluminum caliper with heat, time, and rain, etc. That wants to seize, and if you're not careful, you're going to end up having to time serve or repair the thread in the caliper. We came close on one, but everything seems to have worked out. And then we just took a thread restorer to the bolt and to the caliper, ran that through, and then good penetrant is ATF actually. So just a little bit of that, clean up after that. Of course, you have to get the parking brake caliper off as well. That's just a couple of 15s. That one's not a problem. So we got the rear apart, and now we'll head over to the bench and look at the rotors and pads real quick. Thanks. Okay, so here's the front rotors and front brake pads. As you can tell, quite worn down, very little material left. They cracked a little bit, but otherwise did okay. And the rotors, of course, I don't remember how many sets he's had, probably 4 or 5, but that's great news that we can wear them clearly to minimum thickness, maybe even a little past that, because these slots are gone. And the rotor didn't crack all the way through. That's a great heat checking sort of thought there. I like everything I see. Again, the pads are worn due. You can see that one's cracked. Get a little bit of pad smear, kind of trying, maybe, I don't know. Other than that, he's working hard and brakes are working for him. So we're going to obviously put on new brake pads. But we're going to take the ring apart as well. And that's easiest done if you have a vise, but it's not possible. This hardware comes apart relatively easy. I'm assuming in the rotors we're going to have new nuts and bolts, but you'll probably reuse these hold down or anti-rattle springs, and then the little D bobbin I think gets replaced. We may have to tap them out a little bit. Again, it's steel into aluminum. Sometimes that tends to want to seize a little bit. Before we do that, we'll quickly take a look at the rear discs. Again, lots of use, good heat checking. These are a little wavy on the surface. Didn't really measure the thickness, but they're cracked enough that it looks like they're ready to come off the car. We'll crack open those Girodiscs and have a quick comparison to those in a moment. Other than that, let's take a look at the brake pads. So here's an OEM front. You see they kind of put this big chamfer here. Obviously in the race pad, they don't do that. And then this is where the pins go through. I'm not sure what this is out here, but when we look at replacements, you know, this is the money part of it. So it obviously it matches, and you know, but I don't know what that's for. That's probably where they use this pad in another application or something like that. I don't know. But there's the, you know, these are Girodisc pads. We've, you know, run G-Lock and Carbon. We tried them all pretty much. Anyway, we'll get those going. The rear pads are a little different. We get some overhang sometimes here and there. Again, these outer parts aren't used, so they don't really need to be there. And then the one thing about the rears are, you'll see in the OEM, there's a sensor notch. The car doesn't have wear sensors. And then this part of the pad is carved out for some reason. And so when it's new, we're not swiping the entire rotor, but then as it gets to the end, to the wear limit, it starts, which I'm not sure what the goal there is. They probably aren't interested in telling me, but in the aftermarket, we can fill in the entire area there. So you get a little more pad material, so you got that going for you. Anyway, we'll continue on with the rotor disassembly and restart the video in a minute. Thanks. All right, so these D-bobbins, they stick inside the hat pretty much all the time. So this is what we did. Your method may vary. Okay, so we've got the rotor disassembled. As you saw, popped out all the old hardware. So it's pretty easy to put back together. It just takes a few minutes. There's two different sets of hardware. They stopped using the Belleville washers in Bellevue, Washington. And instead now they, well, both, I don't know. But anyway, now they just have these Brembo style anti-rattle springs. So just be careful. The bolt that goes with that's every other one has a spring on it. The bolt is a few millimeters longer to accommodate, of course. And then they do recommend using Loctite on this hardware because it's not the self-locking type threads. So it's a little painstaking. Clean the rotor's hat surface. It's got, you know, a little corrosion on it from time, but we'll go through all these nuts and bolts. And then the torque spec is minimal, by 60 foot-pounds, so you need a inch-pound torque wrench for that. So we'll get busy on this and have these together in just a jiffy. Continue on the brake job. I want to remind you, rear discs, here's your factory one piece. £22. £17. That's 4 pounds less per disc. All right, one last thing. This is a left rear disc. The slots do cut in, the vanes lay backwards, so that when it's spinning, the air can flow through more readily, in case you were wondering. All right, we are finished. New curved slot rotor rings from Girodisc on the Corvette with some new race pads. So we're gonna get this sucker bedded in and put them out at VIR. Thank you for watching.